Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Laura leisurely put the last of her sundresses into her suitcase and looked around the room with a satisfied sigh. Her movements were gusty and joyful, as if she were about to embark on a long-awaited trip she had been saving up for all year. In her mind, she was already imagining wide beaches, moist sea breezes, and yellow coconuts hanging from palm trees. But really, all that imagery was just a cover for what she was going to keep silent about. She looked up at her husband, Jake, who was standing at the entrance to the bedroom, watching her get ready. "I'm going to turn off the phone so I won't be disturbed," Laura said. Her eyes twinkled slyly. "Imagine a week without a single work call. Just girls, cocktails, and the sea. No men. You could be jealous of me." Her voice was light and sing-songy, like a person who really goes to the beach for fun. And only 2 weeks ago, she complained of fatigue and said that no vacation was planned. But now here was the suitcase, filled with light dresses, expensive sunscreen, and a brand new bikini she wasn't about to show to just friends. "Yeah, sure," Jake murmured with a slight smile. "You deserve a vacation. All day at work, and then you've got the house to run. Get some rest, sweetheart. I'll be waiting for you." He came up to her, gently pulled her to him, and kissed her forehead. For Laura, that kiss was always a sign of home. It told her that she was safe, that she was loved. She answered him with a slight smile and, pulling away, took the suitcase by the handle. She had no intention of feeling remorse. It seemed so simple that she felt only excitement. "The cab's waiting. I'll run," she said, adjusting her purse on her shoulder. "I love you." "Love you too," Jake said back. Then he added, a little quieter, "Come back rested." The door slammed shut, and her footsteps on the stairs dissolved into the noise of the street. Jake stood in the empty apartment, listening to the wind howling through the window. His face changed instantly, as if the mask of the complacent husband had come off. He went to the window, slid the curtains open, and watched a black car take his wife to the place where she was going to spend a romantic weekend. With him? No, with someone else she'd been lying about for months. He ran his hand over his face, trying to chase away the despair. Took a deep breath. "All right, Laura," he thought. "Let's play your game." Just in case, he still glanced at his watch, as if checking how quickly he could react. A plan was already forming in his head. Find a hotel where she was going, and he hadn't decided whether he was going to start a scandal, but he knew he couldn't let her come back without paying for her deception. Suddenly, he remembered a detail. A couple of days ago, he had accidentally stumbled upon a message where Laura had discussed with someone about buying a handy suitcase for a short trip, even though she had told him that she had nowhere to go yet. Even then, a sense of unease had settled in him. Now it was finally coming to a head. Jake had no inclination to quarrel loudly. He hated public squabbles, believing that the problem was solved by actions, not yelling. "We need to proceed with caution and cold blood," he said to himself, and went to the office where Laura usually left her laptop. In the office, which smelled faintly of feminine perfume, Jake turned on his wife's laptop and looked for signs of her deception. She hadn't changed her password. Whether she trusted him that much or just didn't care didn't matter. His anxious determination drove him forward, and with each keystroke, bitterness grew in him. First, he looked in the mail. With a careful search, he came across a letter with a strange subject line: "My hotel bill is confidential." The address was Seaside Escape, and the reservation was in the name of Jessica L. The dates coincided exactly with Laura's bachelorette party. Quickly running his eyes over the details, he realized that the room was a double, that the request for extras included a romantic dinner on the beach and a bottle of wine. What more proof do you need? Jake thought bitterly. His heart was pounding so hard that the blood was pounding in his temples. He opened the trash section and found the deleted photos of Laura and a man laughing and hugging outside the restaurant. It wasn't a friendly hug. The pictures made it look too intimate. He noticed an expensive Swiss watch on the man's hand, the shine of which stood out even in the low-quality photos. And it was clearly not some old friend. Jake realized this was it, the real confirmation. No more doubts. No chance to write it off as a coincidence. Scream? Crash? Absolutely not, he told himself. There were more subtle and perhaps more painful ways to respond to betrayal. He didn't call her. He didn't write angry messages. He just got up from the table, walked to the closet, and pulled out his travel bag, the same one she'd just carted away. "Okay," he muttered, looking at his reflection in the mirror. "We'll play by your rules." He opened the calendar on his phone and quickly booked a ticket. He made it to the airport half an hour before the flight. Everything inside him was boiling, but outwardly he remained as cold as a stone. Already at the hotel, where he'd arrived half a day later than Laura, Jake felt a real burning in his chest. He was going to see her, perhaps in the arms of another man. It was late afternoon when he checked in at the front desk and asked for a room overlooking the pool, away from the elevator if possible. The receptionist smiled, gave him a key card, and wished him a pleasant vacation. And inside him, the tension was just building. He hadn't even taken off his jacket when he decided to go exploring. The Seaside Escape Hotel was located right on the ocean. Cozy buildings, white walls, spacious corridors, lots of palm trees, and a gorgeous pool at the main entrance. Everyone who came here wanted privacy and romance. The perfect place for a bachelorette party without men, Jake thought with a wry chuckle. He walked around the lobby, heading toward the restaurant, which was on the lower level. He was lucky. Just at that moment, Laura was approaching the counter. He saw her from behind a column, frozen so he wouldn't be seen. Laura was wearing a light dress, her hair tied back in a high ponytail. Her eyes shone with happiness, and she had a smile on her lips that made Jake feel hot and cold inside. There was a man standing next to her, not too tall, but, judging by his posture, self-assured. The same expensive watch he'd noticed in the photo. The man was holding Laura against his waist so intimate that there was no doubt they were lovers. Jake's heart clenched with pain and anger. He barely restrained himself from coming out from behind the pillar and yelling at them. But reason said, "Wait, take a picture." He pulled out his phone, took aim, and snapped a couple shots. The quality was average, but enough that you could see them looking at each other, him touching her hair. Laura then turned to the counter, apparently taking a room key or clarifying something. The man whispered something quietly in her ear, and she laughed, taking his hand and heading for the elevator. Jake wanted to follow, but didn't dare. He was afraid they'd turn around and see him. He waited until the elevator doors closed before he looked around. There were other vacationers walking around, some laughing playfully, some reading a guidebook, and he stood clutching his cell phone. That's it, Jake thought. Now you've seen everything with your own eyes. Back in his room, he lit only the bedside lamp, sank heavily on the edge of the bed, and closed his eyes. The images rose before him. Her happy face as she looked at the other. "How could you?" flashed through his mind. And immediately the question flashed up. How could I not have noticed before? After all, judging by the correspondence, all of this hasn't lasted a couple days. She's been immersed in her affair for a long time. Irritation, jealousy, wounded ego all mixed together. "I'm not just going to sit back and watch," he muttered aloud. He took a shower, trying to cool off, and then decided to head down to the bar. He needed to get a drink and gather his thoughts. His plan of action wasn't quite clear. He seemed to want to catch Laura, but how exactly? In what format? A scandal in the hotel? Disclosure in front of the other guests? Or quiet revenge when she came home and saw that he had filed for divorce? For now, he couldn't decide. The night bar at Seaside Escape was located closer to the beach. A cozy patio overlooking the sea surf, torches burning, and soft music that came playfully from somewhere on the speakers. Jake walked up to the bar and asked for a whiskey on the rocks. The bartender, with a smile, immediately placed a glass in front of him. "Rough day?" the bartender asked. Jake nodded, taking a sip, unable to make any more sense than that. He thought he heard someone breathe out frantically under his breath. He turned his head and saw a woman sitting a little to the side. Dark hair, downcast eyes, a half-empty martini glass in front of her. It was clear from the first glance that she was upset about something. Her hand trembled as she touched the glass rim of the glass. Their gazes crossed, and the woman let out a slightly contemptuous chuckle. "You're in trouble too, aren't you?" He was embarrassed, not intending to make the acquaintance, but suddenly he said, "Yeah, my wife is here with someone else." The words came out of his mouth, as if all the tension had to be released. The woman raised her eyebrows. Her lips opened, and she looked at Jake more closely. "My husband is here with someone else," she said. Well, I don't even know who she is, but it still hurts." They sat in silence for a while, each with his own pain. Up close, Jake could see that she looked to be no more than 35. A wedding ring glittered on her left ring finger. Her eyes were beautiful but tired, and he sensed that she was trying to figure out how to react to the betrayal, just as he was. "I'm Jake," he introduced himself, turning to face her. "Claire," she replied. "I'm sorry, I don't usually eavesdrop or hit on strange men. I'm just a little confused right now. I saw them together. They looked like they were on their honeymoon. My husband and I used to go out like that ourselves." He understood her condition, barely enough air to speak properly. He could see her hand trembling slightly, how she was careful not to let herself burst into tears. The same volcano of emotion inside, the same restless thoughts. Why? When did it start? Could it have been prevented? "And how long have you known about this?" he asked. "A few weeks. I found his hidden cell phone by accident. There were messages, pictures, but I didn't know their affair had gone so far that he'd take her to this very hotel. And so I'm here to dash." Her voice shook, and she took a sip of her martini, trying to calm the nervous lump in her throat, to look them in the eye. "I guess. I'm here for the same reason," Jake admitted. "My wife said she was going with her friends, but I found out where she was staying." Claire set her glass down, frowned, as if going over her thoughts, then reached for her phone. She handed him a picture on the screen. Her husband with his arm around a slender blonde, sitting at a restaurant table in some pavilion, the letter S visible in the back, probably part of the seaside escape sign. The man is wearing an expensive Swiss watch. "That's him, isn't it?" she asked. "His name is Patrick." Wow, he was in morals at uni, a round gentleman, and now... Jake clenched his teeth. In the picture, he recognized the same hand and the same watch. "Wait," he said, taking out his phone and showing the picture taken in the lobby. "That's my wife." They looked at each other as if lightning had suddenly flashed over them. Claire's lips quivered, and Jake felt himself being pulled into a maelstrom of anger and frustration. He saw that their chosen ones were one couple, his wife and her husband. "So are spouses or lovers," Claire said slowly, barely holding back tears or anger. How ridiculous and cruel it all was. He still couldn't quite believe the coincidence. On one hand, it seemed unbelievable that they had ended up in a bar next to each other. On the other, apparently fate, or just the irony of life, had bumped them right here. They talked almost until the bar closed. They shared details. Claire said that Patrick used to be a very attentive husband, but in recent months he had withdrawn. Jake remembered how Laura had pulled away, too, covering herself with work emergencies, how she'd become less affectionate. The coincidences were multiplying. The night was surprisingly quiet, with only the ocean in the background murmuring a soft rhythm and the cries of birds occasionally disturbing the peace. Finally, when the bartender announced that it was time to close, Jake helped Claire up from her stool, a little tipsy but dignified. They exchanged phone numbers. "Call if you need anything," he said, "or if you see them together." Claire nodded. "You too, since fate has brought us together on this ground." The next day was hot and sunny. Jake woke up early, but it still felt like the sun was at its zenith. He stepped out onto the balcony and surveyed the hotel grounds. The flowering plants, the neatly trimmed lawns, the flickering light in the pool. It seemed that any man should forget his troubles here. But the events of the previous evening kept him awake. He knew that somewhere nearby, just a few steps away, Laura and Patrick were enjoying their honeymoon weekend. They might be having breakfast by the pool right now, kissing on the sunbeds. "I must act," he said to himself. Later, he went down to the lobby and saw Claire sitting in a chair looking at the front doors. She was wearing a light dress, and her hair was beautifully styled, but her eyes remained sad. When Jake approached, she smiled slightly, like an old acquaintance. "Saw them at the pool this morning," she said softly. They were hugging, joking. My heart sank, but I decided not to let them see me. "That's what I thought." Jake sat down across from me. "This isn't the time. We have to make it painful, but not painful. First, we have to make it so they run into us unexpectedly." Claire nodded, lowering her gaze. It makes me laugh and bitter. I didn't think I'd ever stand guard and catch my husband. But since it's like this, they began to discuss the details. How to set things up so that the two of them would find themselves in an uncomfortable situation where they could no longer get away with it. Claire suggested accidentally showing up at the beach. Jake thought about just breaking into their room. But in the end, they agreed. The best scene would be at dinner in a restaurant, in public. Let everyone see the confrontation. Let them feel shame. Let's make it even more dramatic, Jake said. We'll have dinner for 4, but make them think it's a compliment from the hotel or something. Claire smiled a sad but belligerent smile. Well, we're like 2 cheating spouses who decided to unite. Sometimes it amazes me how life can suddenly turn upside down. They approached the restaurant manager and worked out the details. Assuming the roles of Helen Smith and John Smith, Claire and Jake made a reservation for 4. Family proposal, romantic dinner overlooking the ocean. They asked to add a bottle of champagne. The receptionist happily logged them in. Will you be celebrating your wedding anniversary? She asked with a smile. Claire nodded confusedly and squeezed out. Sort of. The most interesting element of the plan was to write a small note on behalf of the hotel management and drop it off at Laura and Patrick's room via the maid for a small tip. The note read, Dear guests, we are pleased to invite you to a special romantic dinner, which is held in our restaurant only once a month. By happy coincidence, you have received an additional certificate. We are waiting for you tonight at 1900 hours at the table by the window overlooking the ocean. Yours truly, Seaside Escape. The next evening, the hotel lobby had a semi-festive atmosphere. Several couples were already entering the restaurant, arm in arm with waiters ready to escort them to their tables. The lanterns outside were beginning to light up, and the light pinkish sunset was gradually turning to evening twilight. It smelled of fresh flowers arranged at the entrance. The hotel liked to impress guests. At 6:55 p.m., Jake and Claire showed up at the restaurant. The receptionist greeted them cheerfully. Good evening. The table is under the name of Smith, isn't it? Yes, Jake answered. But we're expecting 2 more. Claire looked around nervously. Her insides clenched at the thought that Patrick might be about to show up with Laura, unaware of who was waiting for him. And Jake, despite his outward appearance of calm, could feel his hands trembling slightly. When things are this close to breaking, self-control becomes especially hard. At 7:02 p.m., Laura appeared at the door, followed by Patrick, both in full dress. Laura wore an elegant beige dress and Patrick a suit without tie, stylish enough to look relaxed but still fashionable. They stopped on the threshold, glanced around, apparently delighted to be invited to a special dinner. There were smiles on their faces and a loving excitement. Hello, Patrick said to the receptionist. We received an invitation to a special dinner from the hotel. Yes, your table is ready. Follow the waiter, please, she replied dutifully. The waiter strode forward, showing them the way. Laura cheerfully took Patrick under her arm, pressing herself against his shoulder. They passed through a small cubbyhole and found themselves in a more private room with only a few tables, including one by the wide panoramic window, where Claire and Jake were already seated. The waiter smiled. Please, here is your table for 4. There's a special tonight. A step, another. Suddenly Laura looked up and saw him, her husband. She stopped abruptly. Her face turned pale, as if all the blood had been drained from her. The fingers on Patrick's hand loosened, and he too stared at the people at the table. Everyone's mind flashed. How? Why are they here? It was as if the whole world had shrunk to a square meter of floor at his feet. For a while, everyone stood in silence. The waiter, with a confused smile, said, Please be seated. I wish you a pleasant evening. And, trying to avoid awkwardness, he left, leaving the 4 people, bound by betrayal and resentment, opposite each other. At the neighboring table, someone was talking quietly. From there, they could see that something tense was going on. But no one could see what was going on. Jake, keeping his mask of calm, raised his champagne glass, waiting for Laura and Patrick to sit down. They had to, because standing in front of curious stares was ridiculous, too. Laura slumped back in her chair, her eyes searching for some kind of loophole. Patrick repeated her motion, but he fidgeted, looking for an excuse. Finally, Jake broke the silence. What a coincidence, right? It's a small world. He looked at Laura, who was trying unsuccessfully to force a smile, her lips quivering. Patrick seemed unable to say a word, blinking like a trapped man. Claire averted her gaze so as not to snap in the first few seconds. How did you end up here? Laura asked, trying to look at her husband, but he only squinted his eyes. Jake grinned briefly. Just like you, I decided to take a vacation. Only unlike you, I didn't lie about going to see my friends. The neighboring tables were clearly tense. A couple at one table froze with glasses of wine. A waiter in the far corner craned his neck, trying to figure out what was going on. You don't often see this kind of showdown in expensive hotels, but when it happens, it always looks bright. Patrick, apparently realizing that he couldn't keep quiet, tensed up and said to Claire, "Look, we were going to break up a long time ago because everything between us was—" But she interrupted him, almost hissing, "What are you talking about? You cheated on me with a married woman?" "Well, it's all clear now. If you'd had the guts to tell me the truth a week ago, I wouldn't have come here for you." She spoke louder, so that the two tourists at the next table stopped talking and fell silent. Laura tried to remain calm, but her hands treacherously shook. She clutched her napkin, then abruptly tossed it back on the table. "How can you all judge me?" she shouted. Her eyes glittered with indignation. "I felt alive for once. For once in all these years. Didn't you ever notice that things had gotten cold between us, Jake?" Jake felt the resentment boiling up inside him. All the years they'd been together, he'd worked hard to provide for his family, dreamed of the future. And here was the result. She justified her infidelity by citing wanting to feel alive. He pushed back his glass and stood up from the table. His voice sounded unexpectedly loud and cold. "You may have felt alive, but now I want you to live without me." With these words, he took off his wedding ring and threw it on the table in front of Laura. The ring clattered on the plate and rolled, attracting all eyes like a symbol of a collapsed marriage loudly announcing itself. This gesture was the explosion from which the silence would not return. "No!" Laura almost moaned, seeing what was happening. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. At the same time, Patrick tried to make a move toward Claire, but she recoiled, grabbed a glass of water from the table, and threw it in his face. The water ran down his cheeks and chin, and he blinked, probably not expecting harshness. "How long have you been playing me for, you bastard?" Claire shouted. "You beautiful liar. How many times did you say you were on business trips?" Patrick put the glass on the table with such force that the glass almost cracked. In front of everyone around them, the four men were at the center of a drama. No one understood the details, but the atmosphere was heated to the max. One of the restaurant administrators came to intervene, but the waiter gestured to stop him, apparently realizing that any words now could only aggravate the situation. Jake, seething with emotion, was the first to leave the table, bypassing Patrick and not even glancing in his direction. Claire followed, not wanting to stay in this hell of hate and pain. Laura reached for her husband as if she wanted to hold him, but all she felt was a cold emptiness in return. There was no escape from the realization. It was over. There was silence in the bar, though the background music had been soft before. Everyone looked back at the table of four, where two people were now sitting. Laura and Patrick looked at each other with confusion, and there was an aura of general curiosity around them. Few people had seen their backstory, but now they looked like people whose idol had suddenly burst in the public eye. The waiters, trying to maintain professionalism, didn't come close, except for one who took it upon himself to clean up the spilled water. Laura covered her face with her hands, and Patrick put his hand on her shoulder, but she immediately threw it away. At the same time, Jake and Claire were walking down the hall. They didn't have to agree to go together. It was just that each felt the other's understanding. They were both left with a broken heart. As they walked out of the restaurant and onto the hotel patio, Jake stopped for a moment and closed his eyes as if taking in the fresh night air to keep his rage from tearing him apart. Claire looked at him absent-mindedly, clutching her purse a little tighter to her chest. "You can say what you want, but I feel disgusting," she said. "I wanted to do this for a long time, to take him out, to humiliate him, but now I'm empty inside." I'm empty too, but maybe it's for the best. At least it's all clear now. Jake answered, trying to keep his voice even, though there were 1,000 flashes of pain and disbelief and a kind of burning relief that the masks were off. They didn't say another word, just headed for the elevators together. Claire pressed the 5 button. Her number was there. Jake pressed 6. As the elevator doors slid apart, they looked at each other, and something unspoken hung between them. Was it desire or just a mutual need for reassurance? Was it an obsession or a sincere impulse? Neither of them understood completely, but it was clear they were not strangers to each other at that moment. "Good night," Claire said as the doors opened on the 5th floor. "Good night," Jake replied. She stepped out, and the elevator moved up, leaving him alone. Will this be our last communication? He wondered for a second, and realized he didn't know the answer. The next morning it was finally resolved. The hotel corridors welcomed the morning rush. People were checking out, some moving in. Food vendors were shouting, delivering breakfast to the rooms. Jake had packed his suitcase before dawn. He didn't want to be late. Before he left, he decided to go out on the balcony and breathe in the salty sea air one last time. Downstairs, near the main entrance, he spotted Claire. She was standing next to a cab that already had her luggage loaded. When she realized he saw her, she raised her face. Their gazes crossed, and they waved to each other, without words, but with mutual understanding. This brief encounter might just be a memory of how they had exposed their spouses. Or maybe something else will be. Life will tell. But for now, it's all too raw. All feelings lay bare. Laura stayed in the room. He knew this because the night before, already after the scandal, she had not come out. Maybe she cried. Maybe she called her friends, made excuses. But Jake didn't want to see her. He didn't have it in him to continue his relationship with her, even if she begged for forgiveness. In the lobby, he checked out. The employee at the desk didn't ask anything unnecessary, whether he was used to any drama at the hotel or just sensed that Jake didn't care for conversation. As Jake got into the cab, he caught a glimpse of Patrick and his suitcases appearing from the elevator and Claire standing in front of him. She says something to him, and then a sharp gesture with the palm of her hand on his cheek. A slap, a resounding slap, clearly audible even through the glass. Patrick clutches his cheek, and Claire turns away and walks away to the car. So much for the fairy tale, Jake thought grimly. The cab driver asked where to go, and he named the nearest airport. All he had to do was get away from here. Pain raged in his soul, but there was also a strange sense of release. No more lies, no more backstabbing from his own wife. It was all behind him, no matter what the cost. Exactly a week passed. Laura sat at the window of the same hotel room where she'd extended her stay for a few days, hoping that Jake would return or that she'd find the strength to leave. But the trip was dragging on. The ocean was splashing outside the window. The weather seemed beautiful, but inside her was a desert. No joy, no euphoria, only burning guilt and regret. She'd heard that Patrick had already checked out and left yesterday, with no regrets and no attempt to make a final gesture. His wife, Claire, had filed for divorce. It had been whispered about at the front desk by one of the maids who was aware of the family dramas at this hotel. Laura realized, too, that Jake had probably done the same. She checked her phone, several missed calls from unknown numbers, but she hesitated to call back. She didn't have the energy to go home and say sorry. She felt like she'd broken the bond that kept her life in harmony. The silence of the hotel room was getting on her nerves. She had once dreamed of dramatic love, of passion, of something that would wake her up, but now she sat alone, feeling small and humiliated. What have I done? She asked every day, but only her inner voice knew the answer, which whispered, "You've ruined everything all by yourself." She sat like that in her chair, staring at the waves outside the window, and thought that maybe someday she would find a way to make amends. But she knew this vacation would never seem beautiful again. It would forever be remembered as fake because it had started with lies and ended with betrayal. And there was no Patrick, no Jake, no one to share that sea outside the window with her now. The only thing left was the regret that swept over her and kept her from breathing. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.